News in Port Arthur.
Let's go live to Canberra now. Joining me is National Senator Bridget McKenzie. Bridget, thanks so much for your time. Port Arthur was such a huge moment in Australian history. It obviously had huge political implications for your party. How do you reflect on that day 25 years ago?
Yeah, I think watching the package this morning, Laura, just tells the whole story. It was a horrific incident, untold tragedy and sadness. 35 people lost their lives. Families and loved ones have had to live with that going forward. And to see the perpetrator of that crime behind bars for life is the very least that could occur. We had the National Firearms Agreement, as was mentioned in the package, come into force 25 years ago, and it's worked. We haven't seen an event like that again, despite millions of Australians enjoying hunting and shooting sports. But as a turning point for our nation, it was significant, and I think it's important that we reflect and remember those who lost their lives. And I think one of the heartening aspects of that package was the story of the doctor, and that it really was the best of humanity that often comes out of tragic circumstances such as these.
Absolutely right. And it spoke to John Howard and his leadership at the time, and also him, even to this day, speaking of that moment in his political career, his prime ministership, with such clarity. But you are in Canberra today, if I could change tack, for the Australia Post
I just
inquiry.
wanted to, sorry.
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, sorry, Laura. I did want to sort of say, often at anniversaries such as this, we do hear calls for further restrictions on firearm regulations. I think the facts speak for themselves. There does not need to be any further restrictions on law-abiding firearm owners. We have the Olympics coming up. Feral pest management, $800 million is spent by agriculture controlling feral pests. Farmers need firearms as tools of trade, and so many people enjoy hunting and shooting in their community safely and effectively, and I'd hate to see any further restriction on our law-abiding firearm owners as a result of these sort of occasions.
Yeah, we do see those calls. There are more guns, I'm told, in circulation now in Australia than there was after that amnesty. Is that a problem?
Yeah, look, the language we use around this, it's one of the reasons I set up the Parliamentary Friends of Shooters, to really try and dispel some of the myths and fears that surround those of us that are law-abiding firearm owners. The guns aren't in circulation. They're held very safely and securely under tough regulations by law-abiding firearm owners in gun safes. But yes, we have seen an increase in gun ownership legally, and that is good and proper. We have more people out in our clubs circulating. Shooting sports are one of the things where your gender doesn't matter, your age doesn't matter. The guy in the wheelchair can beat you on any given day as well. So it's an incredibly inclusive sport, and we've seen numbers in those clubs increase, which is actually a good thing. I think the problem is when we see criminal gangs accessing firearms and using them to great devastation. So our law enforcement agencies need to be focused on the real criminals, which are the unregistered firearms.
OK, let's talk Senate inquiry. Yesterday, the Australia Post, the union that is attached to Australia Post or represents its workers, called for the board to resign en masse. Is that a good idea?
Well, that's not for me to say. I thought yesterday's evidence was incredibly telling. There were stories of mail being piled up, parcels and letters in post offices right around the country, including in regional post offices, despite rural and regional services not supposed to be being affected by the temporary order. So that's something we're going to look into further next week when we have another hearing. We also got the board, though, and I'm very thankful that I was able to run through each and every board member online and get their commitment not to privatise any aspect of Australia Post and to really focus on ensuring that rural and regional Australians, many for whom the post office is not just where they post their letters or receive their parcels from online shopping, but is also now their local bank, thanks to the work of former CEO Ms Holgate. So to get that commitment out of the board yesterday is something that I'm looking forward to holding their feet to the fire on over coming years, because too easily sometimes in these government enterprises we take the eye off the ball. They go off and do their own thing, as we've seen through some of the BCG report findings, and really look at privatising, cutting services to community, which, unless you had a Senate inquiry like we're having, wouldn't be uncovered.
So who's cooked up this privatisation plan? Because I feel like Christine Holgate has really halted it, but she seemed to suggest that it was done by, was proactively endorsed, or at least put forward as a plan by some board members, and perhaps even had support from within your government. Is there any support from within your government for this, do you know of?
Well, I can speak on behalf of the National Party, and we'll be opposing any privatisation of Australia Post. The 2,500 community post office. Well, I don't hear those conversations. That's one of the issues we're probing in the Senate inquiry. Remembering this BCG report was commissioned by the shareholding ministers, the finance minister and the communications minister. It was to look into opportunities of e-commerce, the regulatory environment, how we could actually make sure that Australia Post was fit for purpose going forward. Now, that was pre-COVID, and I have no doubt that one of the options considered in that report, despite it yet being released publicly, will be to divest of certain aspects of the business. To have that categorically denied by board members, irrespective of what they might have said at the time, I find very, very heartening. Given yesterday's evidence.
Yeah, I'm sure you'll be holding them to it and keeping a little time code for if that does come up in the future. But Bridget McKenzie, before I let you go, Australia's athletes are going to be vaccinated in that 1B cohort. How do you feel about them being essentially categorised as, you know, the most vulnerable or alongside the most vulnerable?
Yeah, I think it's a great question, Laura. I mean, in times of difficulties such as the world's gone through, holding an event like the Olympic Games that we can all look to, be inspired by our fabulous athletes from around the world, but particularly ours, obviously, and some sort of return to normalcy, I think the running of the Olympics would provide. But obviously, I do appreciate that sense that our elite athletes are able to jump the queue, shall we say, on vaccinations would be providing some concern out in community. And that's why it's very, very important to be clear that it's the Australian Olympic Committee that's going to take responsibility for this. So no, the vaccine rollout that's being conducted out there in community, none of those resources will be being diverted to vaccinating our athletes, and nor should I add, I wouldn't like to see our quarantine effort diverted for our athletes either, and I understand that is one of the conversations. I mean, we've also got to think of the Japanese in this. A recent survey saw that over 70% of the Japanese population wants the Olympics cancelled or postponed because they're concerned about athletes coming from right across the world, bringing whatever strain possible. And I think we're kidding ourselves if we think there won't be COVID at the Olympics, no matter how careful everybody is. And Japan's, had just under 10,000 deaths from COVID. So it's a very real concern for them as a sovereign nation as well. So let's see how it plays out. There's still time for them to get it under control. There's still time for the call to postpone if required. But obviously, not seeing any of our community resources for our domestic vaccination program and quarantine system siphoned off for our fabulous athletes, I think it'd be the best outcome.
Yeah, indeed. Bridget McKenzie, always good to talk to you. Thanks so much.
Cheers.